Hello, my name is Jim Mayer. I'm a training specialist with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work, also known as the ICTW. I'm going to be speaking with you today about the School to Work Transition Guide for Illinois, developed by the ICTW in concert with a statewide interagency transition study group. This resource was first made available in November of 2023. It's my pleasure to share this information with you on behalf of my colleagues on the Interagency Transition Study Group. So I'll begin with just a little background about myself to kind of inform you as to what brought me to this project. I am a certified rehabilitation counselor with areas of specialization in supported employment and special education. Prior to coming to the ICTW, I spent 15 years in adult services in Illinois, coordinating a supported employment program for adults. And then I spent 21 years working in the schools in Illinois as an area-wide coordinator of a transition and work experience program. And now let's proceed to talk about the transition guide. This whole process of creating a school to work transition guide began with the formation of a statewide interagency transition study group. So why an interagency transition study group? Let's look at our goals as a center. One of our goals is to be a statewide resource on evidence-based practices in transition for our state. And the second goal is to build Illinois' capacity for interagency collaboration to support the transition from school to work of students with significant disabilities. So responding primarily to this second goal, an interagency transition study group was formed in the spring of 2023 to examine the needs in our state and to discuss possible solutions, all of which these goals and this project, all of which fit very nicely into our mission statement as being a statewide resource, especially for the transition from school to work for students with extensive support needs. All right, so the mission of this interagency transition study group, we took on these parameters and objectives after our initial discussions. We're comprised of special educators from throughout Illinois who specialize in transition and have many years of experience in that setting. Also, we had vocational rehab counselors from the Illinois Division for Rehab Services who, again, specialize in transition and who had a number of years' experience in that area. And then we had administrators also from both sides of that equation. We had administrators from the State Board of Education for Illinois and also administrators from the Illinois Division of Rehabilitation Services, plus a few of our staff from the Illinois Center for Transition and Work, including myself and David Strausser and Nicole Beery. Our goals really as a group were, first of all, to examine the specific roles, responsibilities, resources, legislation, and funding that currently guide the school to work process in Illinois, the school to work transition process. We also looked at federal and neighboring state resources and decided we would use that information to create a school to work transition guide for Illinois to be used by key stakeholders throughout the state. Folks in the schools, folks in voc rehab, parents, students, etc. A number of neighboring states have had these kind of guides for a number of years, and we decided as a study group that this would be a valuable resource for our state to have. All right, so why this specific approach for the study group to develop a school to work transition guide? We identified a group of needs really to clarify information for our state on various aspects of school to work transition. So, first off, we wanted to clarify the key individuals who are part of the typical IEP planning team for transition and their roles and responsibilities. We also wanted to look at the important steps and stages in the school to work transition process, key terms and definitions for that process, legal aspects of that process, and finally, helpful guidelines and resources for that process. So in terms of developing this school to work transition guide, we looked to national guidance, for example, from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services Transition Guide. It's a national resource. created by that division of the Department of Education. Also, we looked at guidance from the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. We looked at information from other states, particularly some neighboring states of Wisconsin and Indiana, which had nice transition guides, as well as some resources from Pennsylvania and Virginia. We looked at federal and state laws regarding transition. We looked at policies and regulations particular to Illinois, for instance, from our State Board of Education and from the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Rehab Services. We were focusing on those important components and content very specific to our state. So if you'd like to direct yourself to the guide itself, you can access it via this QR code or this link to our website. I'd like to point out that it's a 39-page document in color, and it's designed to conveniently print double-sided onto 20 sheets of paper. So we wanted to keep it to a reasonable length, excuse me, to be a very user-friendly document in many ways in terms of the language and the scope of detail that we went into. All right, so components of this guide that our study group decided would be most important, and in this is the order in which we thought everything should flow. And so these are essentially the chapters or sections of the guide, and this is essentially our table of contents. So, first of all, we decided that there were 9 very important areas we should address. Incidentally, this table of contents in our guide on our online version of it, this is an interactive table of contents so that people can quickly click to whatever section they'd like to go to. So, we started with some what we considered the most important words and terms to know for the transition process, sort of an alphabetical glossary at the beginning, because we wanted, people to realize, hey, any term that you find in this guide or in the IEP transition planning process that you're not familiar with, you can look it up here at the beginning of this guide. Secondly, we gave just a nice flow diagram of the overall transition process to give people that sort of point of reference. The third section delves into details on that transition process of those 5 main sort of factors that play into a transition IEP. The fourth section addresses the IEP team members, giving really sort of job descriptions for those various important members of the IEP team. Fifthly, the 5th section covers a timeline for transition planning, sort of going by grade level. The 6th section talks about transition and the law. In the 7th section, we look at the PUN system, which is very particular to Illinois, our system of potential adult service funding for students with developmental disabilities. Our 8th section covers the summary of performance requirement at the end of the student's school career. And then our 9th section and final section covers both some key resources, key statewide and national resources, plus a couple of sample transition surveys, one for a parent and one for a student. So I'm going to talk in detail now about all 9 of these sections as we move forward with the presentation. All right, our section 1 covers those important words and terms. We spell out what all those initials stand for and those common acronyms that we have in our field. We strive to define those in very understandable language. Again, we want this to be very user-friendly. It's alphabetized. Right off the bat in this manual, we address 41 key terms for the transition process, and our goal was to sort of demystify the process by making these terms very clear to somebody maybe who's new to the process, a parent or a professional new to transition, or even to some of our experienced members who may see a term that they're just not familiar with. All right, so the second section is this nice sort of graphic overview of the transition process, looking at these 5 main components of that process, that IEP process for transition-aged youth, and in kind of a natural, what our study group considered a natural flow. First starting with age-appropriate transition assessments, looking at student interests, preferences, needs, and strengths. Then using that transition information to flow into helping the student develop their measurable post-secondary goals for employment, for education and training, and for, of course, independent living. Then those post-secondary goals should naturally flow into helping the student develop a logical course of study that will support their post-secondary goals, and then also the transition services that will support their progress towards meeting those goals. Fourthly, then we should help the student develop some annual goals in their IEP to help them, again, move towards those post-secondary goals. And then finally, that we would help link them with some adult service agencies that may be appropriate to their goals and help them along that road. And then our guide points out for Illinois, this process begins during the year in which the student turns 14 and a half, and that it's an annual process where we need to relook at all 5 of these areas annually to update and to tweak, to further assess, and to guide that student to, hopefully closer and closer to their post-secondary goals. All right, so then our section 3 takes those 5 areas of the transition IEP and further fleshes it out with definitions and examples of all those key features that we just discussed. It also highlights information very particular to Illinois about things such as, our requirement to provide information about ABLE accounts, our requirement to provide information about the PUN system for students with developmental disabilities and their families, and then also our requirement to provide information about opportunities for career and technical education that the students may access, during their high school years or beyond, to, again, help them with their post-secondary goals. All right, section 4 of the guide is that section I referred to that's really essentially job descriptions of the key IEP team members. So we start with the most important player, the student, and then the parent or guardian as being the two key individuals, right, on that student's IEP team. And for both the student and parent descriptions, we talk about both how for instance, how the student can participate in their own IEP meeting, and also what they can do to prepare for their own IEP meeting. And similarly for the parent or guardian, we cover those 2 aspects of both preparation and participation. And then for school staff, we took sort of a 2-part approach to that as well. First, by giving a general list of the things the school is responsible for providing for that student, primarily through their special education case manager. But then we also give a breakdown with some brief descriptions of those other additional team members a student may have, such as the school social worker, psychologist, physical therapist, guidance counselor, etc. And then next we have the description of the role of the vocational rehabilitation counselor. In our state, that would be generally a counselor with the Division of Rehab Services for our state, who is a key member of the transition team. Our transition study group discussed how important it is to involve that voc rehab counselor early in the process for the students, so they get to know that student and can really be a key member of their team in planning for their future. And again, we took a 2-prong approach for describing the role of the DRS counselor and organization. Really, we start with the role of the DRS counselor, essentially their description of responsibilities for relating to transition. And then secondly, we define various of the services offered by the Division of Rehab Services. And then finally, we have again, sort of a job description for community service providers, kind of a generic one that any community service provider might contribute to IEP planning. And then secondly, we gave some brief descriptions of the 5 most common types of community service providers and what their typical scope of services is. All right, so now we move on to section 5, which is a timeline for transition planning. So that includes key tasks for each grade level, beginning in 8th grade or the year in which the student turns 14 and a half. And our timeline includes both ongoing tasks, so in other words, by the time the student gets beyond the 8th and 9th grade years, they're going to have some tasks that continue to happen every year or need to be revisited every year, but then they're also going to have some tasks unique to that a higher grade level. So we highlight both, kind of separately, the ongoing tasks, and then we highlight those tasks unique to that given grade level. And then we also include details for certain student scenarios, like, the college-bound student, there's certain key tasks that they need to accomplish at different grade levels. Or for a student with developmental disabilities, there's some key questions that we or some key tasks that we put out before that individual to accomplish at different grade levels. And then we also have a final section after working our way from 8th grade through 12th grade. There's a final section for those students who continue on with transition services beyond the typical 4 years of high school. So those students in young adult programs or age 18 to 22 transition service programs. All right, moving along now to section 6, which is transition in the law. So this section highlights key legislation impacting transition age students, including the IDEA legislation for education, the Rehab Act of 1973, the WIOA legislation, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. We talk about the difference between entitlement systems, such as the special education services under the IDEA legislation, versus eligibility systems like our vocational rehabilitation system and other adult services, which are eligibility-based systems. We also talk about important terms related to Social Security and options for families, related to their educational rights, the transfer or delegation of rights, age of majority kinds of questions like, the possibility of guardianship or a power of attorney or supported decision-making for students who may need that kind of support. So we tried to give short summaries of these key laws in understandable language, and we also separated out so that, we highlight the federal laws in one section and the state laws in another section. And then along with some of these kind of policies and regulations that are very important to transition. All right, moving along now to section 7. This is a section very particular to those students with developmental disabilities and their parents or guardians. This, again, is a system particular to Illinois for, it's basically kind of a waiting list for funding for those who are less familiar with it. So this section explains what that PUN system is, who it's for, describes how to enroll in that system, how to get on that waiting list, and regularly check your status on it. And also, we answer some frequently asked questions that students or family members may have about that system, such as, what are some of the services the funding can cover? What's the difference between the two categories that our state has for those services of planning and seeking services? How do you move from one status to another? And how do I know if and when I might have my name pulled from the list, to receive that funding? All right, section 8 then is the summary performance. Our study group thought it was really important to explain this requirement for our students as they exit the school system. And so this section describes what that summary performance is, why it's needed, why it's an important document. It breaks down the key components of that document, shares some helpful tips for educators to make sure it's a meaningful document and that one that's beneficial for the student. We really emphasize actively involving the student in developing this SOP document, linking it with their IEP process. In other words, kind of talking about where the student is leaving off with their goals and what kinds of support they may need looking into the future. Basically wanting this to be a helpful document to that student as they try to communicate their needs to future service providers. This section also provides a link to a sample a summary of performance template that our State Board of Education provides. And then also we have a nice little checklist in there for a student to think about, of important kind of documents that they need to kind of carry with them into adult life to help them with that transition. All right, now our final section, section 9, looks at some key resources that may help the student, their team members, their family members, with that transition to adult life. And so our study group found 11 categories of services that seemed really important to include. And we, again, focused on resources that were statewide or even national in some cases. we assumed that individual schools may have listings of their local services that they give to students, but this is a statewide guide, and so we focused on those statewide resources. And so it's all alphabetical by sort of category of service, and then even within those categories by the different service providers. And it's an active list with embedded websites, so people can go straight to the websites of some of these organizations and get information that they may need in these 11 areas of service. And then finally, there's sort of a part two to our final section. After the key resources, we have 2 sample transition surveys. So there's one that can be used by students and the other by their parent or guardian. Our study group recommends those be completed at least twice during the student's school career, once early in their transition process and once they more in the middle. It covers domains of employment, post-secondary education and training, independent living, and then we also added that 4th important area of recreation and leisure planning. So information gleaned from these can contribute not only to a student's individual education plan, their IEP, but can also contribute to their IPE. If they're active with vocational rehabilitation, they will need to establish an individual plan for employment, an IPE. So these surveys should provide information helpful not only to the special education case manager in helping the student with their IEP goals, but also help the student and their voc rehab counselor in looking at their individual plan for employment. So, and these surveys are, we make it clear they can be modified. For instance, if school wants to reword things for students who need a lower reading level of terminology, also that it could be easily read to a student could be assisted in completing this survey. But it's one that we hope will be helpful throughout the state, both of these versions of this survey. All right, and finally, just to wrap things up, our plans for distribution and promotion of the guide are still in process. We've accomplished a good bit of that, but really would enlist your help. If you work with students in your area and with colleagues in your area, if you can help spread the word about this guide, we do appreciate it. We hope this is a resource that will be very valuable throughout our state. Some of the things we've done so far, we've sent out email blasts, both through our own ICTW and through other partner organizations. We've sent out social media announcements. We have given conference presentations, for example, at the Illinois Transition Conference, the IAASE Conference, the Illinois chapter of the CEC Conference, and then the TASH National Conference. We have links to the guide on not only our ICTW website, but also some, again, partner organizations have provided links to our website page with the guide, and we're encouraging local schools, transition planning committees, regional offices of education, special education cooperatives to post a link to our guide on their websites. We're also doing some outreach with parent and advocacy groups, encouraging them to mention our guide in their newsletters or on their websites or in their announcements. But we're very open to other ideas. If you have other ideas, please get in touch with us via our website. Thanks very much, and I hope this information is very helpful to you.